פשוט יזיז את זה, שזה יהיה פה. עדיף. אני אומר לך, נראה לי אף אחד. כאילו יגיעו איזה בן אדם אחד או משהו. אפשר להביא שקופיות. אני מרגיש לי כאילו אני לא מוקמה. Yes, yes, it is. Nice to meet you. I don't have the word. Did you find the place all right? Sure. Nice to meet you. Like you see, there's a lot of rules. Yeah. Don't worry about it. We're not gonna have that many people. You can keep the seat, somewhere up front. I'll pick the best seat. Pick the best seat in the house. Yeah. There's also gonna be people on Zoom. Yeah. Did you come from far? Did you come from far? Yeah, I drove about a half hour and a half. Wow. Westchester. And what country are you representing? 40. And you have arms. And there was a male downstairs. Okay. Oh, yeah. They wanted to include the host name. I don't know what the host name. I gave a seminar there. I said no, it's not recognized. So they were helping. No problem at all. Listen, we're gonna. Do you have a card or something? It's the same card. Same card. What's your name? Yvonne. We're gonna start in a few minutes. We're still waiting for people to sign up. Sure. You want to go get coffee or anything? Okay. We're gonna be starting soon. Nice to meet you. And this is Ayelet. She's part of our design team. And we happen to be dating for 4 years already, so just a coincidence. Yeah. Yeah. No problem. Oh, I think I have one with there's a new email here. Sean. Huh? I got one. Oh, you got one? Yeah. So you're gonna share? Nowadays I don't even carry this, mostly try to. Hi, Mina. Thanks for joining, Mina. We're gonna start soon. Just sit tight. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Thank you so much. Thanks, Yuval.
Yeah, absolutely. We're gonna start soon. We're just gonna wait for a couple more to join, and we'll get started.
Hey, hi to all our virtual joiners today. We just got to know each other a little bit here. Mina, would you like to just introduce yourself, where you're at, and who you are representing before we get started?
Yeah, sure. Didn't realize it would be a pretty lean team here on the virtual side, but I'm glad you guys are there in person. Mina Sankran, I'm the founder and CEO of a company called Ketos. We've recently been approved as a technology to work with the U.S. Air Force as well as Navy and military. So I was very curious to learn more about what specifically the session was about. So curious to learn more. And I'm based right outside around Austin, Texas.
Awesome, awesome. Thank you so much. We're about to get started. Amarjad, I'm not sure how to pronounce your name. Would you like to introduce yourself so I don't butcher it?
Yes, no, thank you. My name is pronounced Amberjot, but most people can't get it, so no
I
big
was
deal.
close.
You were very close. So yeah, thank you. So my name is Amberjot. I'm the founder of a company called Skylark Labs, and we primarily develop AI-based solutions for national security applications. Before starting the company, I used to work at Stanford University for DARPA. I worked as part of their drones program, and now we develop analytics, which is consumed by a lot of the defense contractors in the US and by its allies. So just wanted to see what the funding opportunities are. We have raised some money from outside VCs, but we are getting into more of the government program. So just wanted to learn more about it.
Perfect, perfect. So we have a mix of VCs, investors, founders here, which is great because that's what we're really talking about. Even though a lot of the content is also going to be directed towards the investors, so that's a great thing. We're about to get started. I'll just ask everyone who is joining virtually just to stay on mute until afterwards when we'll have some time for questions. Nice to meet you. What's the name? Nick. Oh, perfect. Dr. Well, we're about to get started. We'll get acquainted a little bit after, so we don't keep people waiting. Thank you for joining. Now we'll get started. Perfect. We can hide the environment. So first of all, days of COVID. I guess 2 years after people are used to doing Zoom and stuff like that. We really appreciate you guys coming out, taking the time. On one hand, it could be funner, like more fun and more in person and such a different type of experience, obviously. But still, we appreciate it. We ourselves are based in Israel and Jerusalem. That's where the company's based. Yeah, we'll get into it. So the main, I'll talk a little loud just so people on the virtual side can hear as well. The main topic of today is match funding opportunities through the United States Air Force for investors, specifically in New York, because we're here. We're going to talk about a little bit what we have anything to do with it, because we are, as I said, based in Israel, nothing to do with the Air Force, technically. So why are we even taking your time and talking about it, and what is Equal Fund Funding and Deep Tech Showcase? We can go to the next slide. Am I not working that? Yeah. Perfect. No, I think then it'll work. So deep tech crossing. We'll start with a little bit of background. We can go to the next slide. Our vision: bringing more deep tech to market by planning a way to market, generating funding, and spurring on collaboration, which will lead to pilot contracts and initial sales for our clients. Now, what we are basically is a group of companies focused specifically in the deep tech space. And I'll say in a bit what that means, because everyone kind of calls it, by a different name. But we're focused on helping innovative and novel technologies find their way to market, from the concept stage to the non-dilutive and dilutive funding opportunities, into actual commercialization and building out their product, as well as finding who those end users are going to be and who those end customers are going to be on that. We work with many different ways through multiple different divisions and different companies that we're part of, and we'll get into that a bit as well. Just some quick details about us. We serve 350 plus startups annually throughout our network, and as I said, it's a group of companies that all are kind of focusing on the different aspects of that process of bringing your technology to market. Go to the next slide. 70 full-time employees in those 10 different entities. It basically splits into business development services and funding services. So the two primary ones we're going to talk about that have to do with the matching opportunity that we're going to discuss. The two primary ones that are relevant for today are Eagle Point Funding and Deep Tech Showcase. So to give you a little bit of history, Eagle Point Funding is kind of Deep Tech Showcase's older sister. Eagle Point Funding, as written here, are grants and contract specialists. They're focused on finding non-dilutive funding opportunities for deep tech companies in the United States. And everything I'm talking about is focused on the United States, just for future reference. And their job is to understand what the company's technology is, who the relevant applications, where the relevant applications can be throughout the DoD, Department of Energy, pretty much anything that isn't that's outside of life sciences, and I'll say why in a minute. But their job is to go find those opportunities, look, and find as many opportunities as possible. And over a 9-month period of engagement, they basically help the companies submit in a timely, orderly, and also a very successful fashion. So that's what their focus is. And Deep Tech Showcase was a natural development to that process. Eagle Point Funding basically understood, well, we're really great at helping the companies achieve their non-dilutive funding goals. We don't have the tools to help them on the dilutive funding side, on the commercialization side, because we're talking about technologies that are heavily based on R&D, and sometimes 10 years of R&D or 5 years of R&D, and the people are naturally very scientific and focused on proof of concept and beating the competition. And as amazing as these innovators are, sometimes it can be very hard to do that alone, as well as build out your business plan, build out the right way to market, do your own competitive analysis. I think all of us know that when we're in charge of something and we're the ones who built it, it can be hard to step out of that mindset after years in a lab and go out and see, okay, well, who's doing something that on the surface looks better than what I'm doing? And how can I, change my ask, change the way that I'm presenting myself to investors, to customers, and things like that. And that's why Deep Tech Showcase was created. And it's both an ecosystem that houses the stakeholders in the market, from investors to government agency representatives and commercial partners and industry partners from corporations, as well as the deep tech founders who are looking to. And it serves both as a platform. We have events and introduction processes that we facilitate and things like that. But on the company side, we're also a business development firm focused in this type of space. So we help the companies, as I said. We have a strategies department that's written right here, where the companies go through 12 sessions with us, defining their primary markets, their secondary markets, understanding what are going to be where are the pitfalls that can occur. If I decide that these are my end users, these are my end customers, what are going to be my major issues going forward, and how can I already prepare for those in advance and try and fine tune that go-to-market strategy or whatever the business needs are that I'm looking for. Showroom is a division of ours that focuses on gaining traction for companies through conferences, internationally, through Europe, through the United States. Companies who are heavily invested in what they're doing will invest a lot of capital, a lot of time and resources into going to events, and they won't necessarily walk away with the best outcome. So what we're basically doing is helping them not only market themselves beforehand, but prepare and already come with a strategy and a plan to these networking conferences and stuff like that. And deep tech marketing is, it goes together with that, but that's more of a marketing service that companies work with us. Basically, everything from straightforward marketing and email and newsletters and filling the calendars to actual SDRs that we allocate for companies to manage their leads and things like that. Typically for later stage companies, obviously, but that's kind of everything that involves. I won't get too deep into the rest. Awesome. So I don't know what people's backgrounds are with federal funding in general, or specifically through the Air Force. But for today's purposes, we'll talk about how it typically works, and then we'll integrate what that process looks like with this special program that the Air Force has announced. So how does federal funding typically work? So the company, there's a founder, he has a small team typically with the companies we're talking about. And that company applies for funding. They want, obviously non-dilutive funding is a great opportunity for people in the scientific world, developing innovative technologies. They don't want to give away their IP just yet. They don't have the money on their own. They've invested it all in the product. They turn to the Air Force, which in this case, AFWERX. And I don't want to confuse anyone with the military mumbo jumbo and stuff like that, but AFWERX is just the body within the Air Force that allocates the funds. That's all it is. The first stage is called phase 1 out of 3 stages, as you see on the screen. Phase 1 is the first initial round of funding. They phase it out just to make sure that they don't put all their eggs in one basket. So the first stage is applying. They fill out the documents and the bureaucracy, which is a big reason equal point funding exists, because it's very hard to deal with those processes, as we all know probably from the latest tax returns. So that's just that first phase where they apply. They prove their market validation, meaning that the concept actually works and that their market is actually out there and there's a reason for this to exist. They go to, they could do it online, they can find the opportunities, they find where their company can fit in, and then they apply. And for that, in that round, they are limited to 50K from the Air Force's side. The Air Force says, great, you proved that first initial step. We're going to give you 50K in order to get to the next step. And some of the companies might not succeed, some of the companies will succeed, and then they'll be able to apply again for phase 2. Now, phase 2 here gets a little trickier. The money is larger for the companies. There's 500K to 1.5 million is the range that the Air Force is going to invest if you pass that first stage and you're applicable for that second stage of funding. That money is also supposed to go towards prototype and actually coming away with a viable product. The note here, and this is kind of the catch, is that you have to have what's called a memorandum of understanding, an MOU. And for anyone who doesn't know what that is, it's basically an Air Force stakeholder in this case who has to meet with the company and say, or vice versa, really, the company needs to find an Air Force stakeholder who will meet with them and say, if you commercialize, we are going to be interested in buying this product. They don't need to buy it. They don't need to give them money. They don't need to do anything. That person 2 months later might disappear because he gets transferred to base out of Africa or Germany or anywhere in the world. And that's why this is a very crucial and tricky step for the companies. But they have to go out there and seek on their own an Air Force stakeholder who wants to be a customer, and he has to give that stamp of approval. Naturally, even though it's not like a written rule, the higher up he is, the more important he is in the military or in the DoD, or in this case in the Air Force, the more important that person is going to be, the more likely it is to get that grant. So if a company has an MOU, they've won phase 1, they apply, they win, they get 500K to 1.5 million. I'm sure everyone knows on this specific event that 500K to 1.5 million isn't that large of a funding stream for these companies trying to expand their team and commercialize and everything that goes together with that. And the end goal is phase 3. It's a contract. That's basically what it is. Sometimes it's written more complicated than that, but it's a contract with the Air Force. And therefore, there's no dollar limit to it. It could be, we've worked with companies who've gotten projects for 2 million over 2 years. Right now, we're working with a company that just got $10 million from the Air Force to develop a product over 2 years. It could be 20 million. There is no dollar limit depending on the budget of the department they're working with, the need, how long the project is. It could be a 10-year, $30 million project. There's no limit to it. And what that basically provides the company is a sole source government purchase, where the government exclusively is buying things from you. Thank you so much for joining. Feel free to sit down, no worries. And that's basically that end goal for these companies in the process. Now, you see here, struggles with commercialization. This is exactly the pinpoint where both us, the companies, and the Air Force have realized that companies have an issue crossing over. We call it the innovation valley of death. It depends, what you want to call it, but basically the Air Force has already invested 50K. Then they invested 500K to 1.5 million. And yet still they realize that no matter, all those stages that they've gone through, companies are still falling, trying to commercialize over that step. So the Air Force basically got together and tried to understand how they can create a larger influx of capital into these companies. Obviously, the dilutive funding arena is something that is very relevant, not only because that's another place that companies can get money or another place that companies anyways want to get money from, but even more than that, what the Air Force understood is that it's not enough that they're giving their stamp of approval on these technologies. They need someone on the commercial private sector side to also look at the companies and give their approval. Because what it does is it forces the companies to have to refine their business plan. It's something that the Air Force is not inclined or they don't really have a vested interest in doing. They care about their interests, beating China, all these big, American ideals, which are all amazing, but they don't have a person whose job it is to help companies make sure that the commercialization plan makes sense, or that there isn't a private sector company not interested in the military use case that's doing something way better and no one's gonna ever want to continue with this company. And what that could cause is companies that come through to the contracting phase, and then 2 years later, they close down the company and the Air Force is left without a profit. So that's a huge issue for the Air Force, where basically they realize that they're putting all this money into this project and still a high percentage of companies weren't making it to the third stage. We could move to the next slide. We'll have time for questions at the end, by the way. I don't want to throw too much at you. So the Air Force's match funding program is basically what they released starting in 2020. It's called the TACFI STRATFI. Speaking of military mumbo jumbo, TACFI STRATFI, we'll get into what that exactly means and break it down so it's way simpler. The purpose is to catalyze relationships between Air Force and Space Force. Space Force is just under the Air Force. It's, they have those two entities. Connecting the end users and acquisition professionals and the private sector innovators and investors. So exactly the purpose is exactly that same issue that I was discussing, bridging the capability gap between current SBIR phase 2 efforts and phase 3 scaling efforts, facilitating delivery of strategic capabilities for the Department of the Air Force. They want to win, they want to have better technologies, and they want to make the process way more efficient, and they want to help these innovators really scale their companies for the better, to better the Air Force as well. This is their mission statement for the program. I write it. So that's really the purpose. Let's go to the next slide. Awesome. So as I said, there are two main issues for companies in that process getting to phase 3. One is the MOU that they need to get signed. And the second one is that getting to commercialization. Ourselves, Deep Tech Showcase and Eagle Point Funding in our group, we basically, because we are kind of at that intersection between public sector representatives, investors, and the founders, we basically found ourselves saying, well, it seems like we're really in a great position to make these two sides connect. So we have two programs. The first one we won't get into too much today, but it's called the MOU Club. It's for AFWERX phase 1 winners seeking an MOU. We have a community of over 100 Air Force stakeholders who are able to sign an MOU for these innovators. And what we're basically doing is saying, what are you interested in? Tell us what you're looking for, and then we'll actively scout for you and look into the companies we're working with anyways and help connect you, and have a warm introduction, sit down and start the business relationship there. So that's been able to facilitate tens of MOUs for companies that we work with in a much more timely fashion, as well as give a construct to the companies where they're part of a group of companies. And it kind of works like a accelerator program where they're together, they go through coaching sessions, they know how to apply themselves to these stakeholders, etc. And the second one, which we're discussing today, is the TACFI STRATFI Growth Accelerator. Deep Tech Showcase helps pair eligible companies, U.S. investors, and U.S. Air Force stakeholders, and Eagle Point Funding helps build a winning proposal. So we're able to bring in investors who come and speak with the companies and possibly give, they want to join this matching program. And Eagle Point Funding, as grant consultants, they're able, when the company is selected, they're able to help write that grant and help with all the government, issues and paperwork and everything involved in that. I will just say, as I said at the beginning, we're a privately held company. We work as a service for these companies that are in our portfolio, and we're not part of the U.S. Air Force. So STRATFI and TACFI from AFWORKS. As you see here at the bottom, TACFI stands for Tactical Funding Increase, and STRATFI stands for Strategic Funding Increase. The only thing that really needs to mean to you, tactical, as you see, it's smaller money, is more short-term, and strategic is a larger strategic effort for the Air Force, and that's going to be a longer-term deal. So the money goes up, but it's also a longer-term commitment, and it's a little more complicated, but we'll get into that. Trying to think if there's anything else I should add here. Nope, we can move on. So now how does this process look with TACFI? It's not a substitute for that phase 3 contract. Hey, thank you very much. Nice to meet you, no problem. It's not a substitute for the phase 3 contract with the Air Force at the end of the day. What it is an intermediary to help boost those companies, as well as pretty much guarantee their contract at the end of the day with the government side in the Air Force. Because the government's coming and investing even more money in them, and that purpose in the end is a contract, it's procurement. So there's virtually no reason other than weird cases or investors that fell through, or companies that had to disband or things like that, where there isn't a contract waiting for these companies at the end of the road. And investors are basically joining this system right at that critical stage of development at the end. So there's still the phase 1 or 50K for a company, then the phase 2, and then the TACFI STRATFI will be up to $15 million. We'll go over the numbers soon. And the idea of it is proven market readiness. The investors are joining into this kind of federal funding story. They're giving their stamp of approval. They're saying this company's business model is sound. We believe in it. We want it. It's a space that makes sense on the commercial side and on the federal side, and that's why we want to join. And then at the end, again, no limit to the dollar limit at the phase 3, and Air Force customer who's waiting basically for that product. Awesome. So here's a few results just from this last round of 2021. As I said, there's been 2 programs of this match funding opportunity already. This is the first time that it's not an official pilot, which means the funds were increased, as well as it basically got a stamp that's going to be a long-term thing that happens cyclically every year. So this is from 2021. There were 162 capability packages submitted. All that means is that packages of an investor getting a commitment to a company that were approved for match funding by the Air Force. So that's what it means, capability packages is basically 162 successful submissions. There are packages that were supported but haven't been finalized yet. So there's also some of those in the process still. And as it says here, this may change over time. 60 STRATFI and 92 TACFI. I will say, we'll talk about the difference between the tactical and the strategic opportunity for investors. I will say that the TACFI is a little bit more relevant on the investor side. However, STRATFI, as I said, it's the larger money sums, the longer term kind of agreements, and it has its own unique applicability. We can continue. So how does the programs actually work? And feel free to ask questions during this process. And I'll try to answer my best, or we can wait till the end. But I don't want things to just go by over your head. Just say so, and I'll try to explain things better if I don't do a good job. So the first one, as I said, which is the simpler, shorter term one, is TACFI, right? Super simple, right? One-on-one. $1 from the investor side, $1 from the government side in these companies. Obviously, given that the companies are phase 2 awarded, as with this whole program. So $1 from the private sector, $1 from AFWORKS. The funding range from AFWORKS is 375 to 1.8 million. That's their range that they've agreed to match. If an investor wants to invest more, that's a different story. But given that it's 1-for-1 rate, 375 to 1.8 is the same from the government side and from the investor side, which for a company basically means 750K to 3.6 million. And this is the smaller amount program for these companies to commercialize, which as an investor, and we'll talk about why it's such a great opportunity, especially for investors who are interested. is the great thing is that you're basically giving $1 million into a company, but the company's getting $2 million to actually develop the product. So you have that other partner, a tier one customer, waiting at the end, but also for the actual investment. It's creating this amazing opportunity for the company to really excel and develop themselves from where they're at. Now going into STRATFI funding, the longer term one, here's where things get a little bit DOD. So 1 to 1 to 2, right? $1 from AFWorks. If a company can bring $2 from an investor and $1 from an Air Force customer. So right, we talked about a person who's an Air Force stakeholder who could sign an MOU. So those people, if they're the decision maker in their department, they also have a budget. And they can decide to allocate a budget to a company developing a product for them. So I could sign an MOU for a company, but I could also actually give them money, say, hey, I want to be a customer of what you're developing, but I also want to help, I want to help get it done. So let's, AFWorks as a funding mechanism will give you some, and I'll also give you some through this match funding program so that you can walk away with, better funding, long-term program. So as I said, it's AFWorks gives $1, the Air Force stakeholder gives $1, and the investor matches the government side 2 for 2, basically, if that makes sense. Did I complicate things or did I simplify it? Awesome. Okay, you guys are great. Funding range, 3 million to 15 million for AFWorks. And because it's equal to the government side, it's also 3 million to 15 million from the stakeholder side or the Air Force customer side. And then on the investor side, because it's a kind of 2 for 2 from the private sector and government together, it's 6 million to 30 million from the investors. Those are the ranges. And this creates an opportunity for a company. It's usually a longer term project, 12 million to 60 million. Something important to understand about the process after actually winning is that it's a timed process. There's checkpoints that the companies, milestones that the companies have to achieve to continue the programs even after they're awarded. That's just something that's also important on the government side, that they have their own checks and balances of how the company is developing through their program. Awesome. What types of companies are we even talking about? So we, as I said, other than life sciences, we work with companies in every industry, specifically for the Air Force. There could be opportunities technically, but really life sciences just isn't part of it. And the only reason that we don't work with life sciences is that we actually have a sister company called Freemind Group that only does life sciences. So if that says, if that's relevant specifically to anyone, feel free to talk to us or Ariel Schatz, the founder of the company, which is even better, probably, to hear more about Freemind Group. It's important to remember that the Air Force, I think, don't take my word for it, but I Googled it before, and I think if the Air Force was a country, it would have the 20th largest budget out of countries in the world. It's a huge, it's a company, right? It's its own entity. It has thousands of vehicles, so mobility is a big thing. We're not talking about bombs and missiles and only radars and things like that. It's a huge organization with organizational problems, supply chain problems, HR problems, data problems that are equally as important on the commercial sides to corporations that we work with, from Walmart to Google to many different corporations who are interested in the same companies that we work with because they're solving everyone's day-to-day problems. So that's just something to remember. AR, VR, training technologies, which are simulation and anything educational and things like that, to robotics, AI, mobility, everything here, and many more industries. Pretty much anything you can imagine. I won't get into this too much, just so you understand, this is from AFWorks themselves, the review process. There's an initial review once a package is submitted with the approval of the investor and the company giving the submission. Air Force Ventures is just the body that ends up giving the money through AFWorks. They give their strategic review. Then there's a board review. It's very similar to an investment process through an VC or private fund and things like that. My point here is just that they do their own due diligence as well on top of everything that's already been done. They review this process before they're going to before they influx another amount of capital into the companies to go on. And then the last stage is the award, obviously. Just to understand the impact, this is an example taking from the statistics of 2020 winners today. So post-STRATFI funding, This is an analysis of the numbers behind the companies. A company called Mapware was evaluated at 4 million, and the valuation in February 2021 was 40.4 million. Companies, I won't go one by one. It's a company that was very successful in durable industries that was 1.9 billion, and their valuation a year later was 4.6 billion, etc. These ones are ones that weren't yet haven't come through yet through the system at this date. But this is just an example of the impact that this multi-level funding influx for the companies can how much it can boost their productivity and their way to commercialization for these founders. And what a great opportunity is really to just take part of it. What's in it for me? Most important question. So first of all, invest knowing your dollar will be matched. That's always a good thing, no matter where, I think, and in every facet. And that's exactly what I was saying before. You're giving, X amount as an investor, but then the company is receiving a match fund of that, obviously, from the airport side, and therefore the company can double, what they can do with the amount of money that you are already investing in, or whoever the investor is. Low competition on investment. So the government isn't taking any equity. Typically, when a company is going out to raise, they have a lead investor who's going to take 10%, and then there's going to be a few other smaller funds who are going to, join as follow-on investments and take other percentages, and the company now has to decide how much they're allocating to the lead, and that whole process that can be very, very hard to deal with and very arduous. So there's no competition because the government's not taking any success. A quick note here is that we don't take any equity off the investments that come through our ecosystem either. So the companies are paying us upfront fees for this to take part in our program or service fees for that matter. But we're not taking anything. Eagle Point funding helps write the grants, and therefore they take a 5% success fee, but only from the government side. Nothing's being diluted from the actual investments. It's also because that's how we work, and also because it doesn't make sense really when we're trying to help these companies go forward and get these investments. So we're not looking to take anything off the top. Invest in pre-vetted technologies. Not only, if we talk about from the smaller to the bigger ones, the first vetting process is the companies work with us. And we have a very high interest in the program being successful. So we have our own process, obviously, but more on that. These companies have already won 2 phases of funding through the United States Air Force, which is a very long and hard process. So all of them have typically, on average, won around $800,000 from the Air Force and have had to work very hard to do that. So that's that. Kind of they have that solid stamp of approval on that end. Invest in technology with multiple markets. You know that they're relevant on the federal side, and your knowledge and other people's knowledge will also show how relevant that is also on the commercial side. No payments until award. We'll talk about the statistics and the details in a second, but basically what that means is until a company is actually awarded, you don't have to make a payment. The investor doesn't have to, other than a commitment, he doesn't have to actually move the funds until a company actually wins the award. We'll talk about the details. And the last thing is there's a tier 1 customer on standby. These companies are basically guaranteed a tier 1 customer in the Air Force at the end of this, regarding any other traction that they may gain afterwards due to this program and due to this kind of influx. What can be counted towards private matching funds? What funds count, what funds don't? Equity agreements, IP rights, joint ventures, and pre-sales, all good to go, all in the green line. Funds that aren't accepted, family and friends rounds, companies can't allocate that money for this program. Loans can't be leveraged for this program. No recent spinoffs. I believe it's 1 year is the limit. If a company is part of a group of companies and he wants that sister company of his to now allocate some funds into helping him win this award. So that's also something that's off the table, as well as bootstrapping. Now the funds not accepted here, something important to understand, and it's written here below. Sometimes things aren't written, but we have a lot of experience with these programs, and we know what's quote unquote frowned upon by the Air Force, which usually guarantees that they won't say yes. They won't accept the company. Convertible notes are just an example of that. They will be accepted at the contracting officer's discretion. So it's possible. We haven't seen high success in it, but it is, just something that's important to know. The loan, with that being said, the loan must have an automatic conversion clause within 5 years of loan receipt. When do I need to pay? Another important question. So I split it into TACFI, STRATFI because it's a little different. TACFI, as I said, so there's two parts to it. The private funding letter, which is that confirmation that you are committed, that the investor is committed. The private funding letter plus the private investment funds must be received by the company prior to the TACFI award, not when they are selected. So the company gets selected to the award, but it takes usually a bit of time until they actually receive the funds from the Air Force. Until they receive those funds, they don't actually have to get the money from the investor. So that's something that happens only after the investor is selected. After the company is selected for the award. To qualify, they have to have a private funding letter from the investor saying if they are selected, and these are things that are also drafted and issued by the Air Force. So it's not even something that really needs to be dealt with. There's a format for it, and it's a very clear way of how to give that commitment to a company. And STRATFI is even more, I don't know if to call it lenient because the sums of money are much larger, as you saw. But the private funding letter is needed prior to the STRATFI award, similar to TACFI. And the funds can be received throughout the process that the program is, that they're selected for. So if a company has a deal with the Air Force to work on this project for 4 years for the amount of money that they're winning, it can be given through that process. Two notes here, just from our own statistics and understanding of what actually ended up working in the last 2 rounds. The most probable investment agreements for TACFI came through safe agreements and quick equity rounds. And STRATFI, most probable investments agreements for STRATFI came through usual equity round. Something to understand why a quick equity round would be very successful in this case is because the Air Force announces the program. Ariel, do you remember when they announced it this year? A month and a half ago? No, that's not. Usually they'll very challenging. And they don't want too much time. They don't want to have too much applicable companies also. So the Air Force, there's all these different internal things that we can talk about later that aren't relevant enough for how we've noticed things have been shifted around. But in any case, they announced it around a month ago. The deadline for getting that approval from an investor and commitment is June 30th. And that's how it's worked till now every year. Maybe it'll change in the future or there'll be a little more time. But as of now, being that it's a relatively new program, they don't, as Ariel said, they don't leave a large window for companies to talk to investors, which made it even more important for a program like ours to help say, let's scale it. Let's take a bunch of companies that are looking for it, a bunch of investors, Air Force stakeholders as well, if we're talking about STRATFI opportunity, which could be much, much harder. And let's put them all into one program where they can meet and connect and make something happen. Yeah, next slide. So short sidebar is that AppWorks is an amazing opportunity for any companies. If you're a company, if you're an advisor, if you're an investor, you have your own portfolio of companies, any dual use startups or later stage companies as well, who are developing something that could be relevant both on the commercial side and on the federal side. AppWorks is an amazing opportunity. They can do STRATFI, TACFI, and everything we're talking about. They can do a regular track without it. It's not something that's a must for every company. They can go directly from phase 1 to phase 3, meaning that there's many different sub-programs within AppWorks relative to other DoD entities. So there's, for instance, this year there was a direct to phase 2 opportunity. So companies skip phase 1. They were told if you get a signed approval from a stakeholder, an MOU, and you're relevant, you can jump, instead of going to the 50K, you can go up to the 750K immediately. So it's just something to keep in mind. Eagle Point Funding have amazing knowledge, both for if you just want to talk to your portfolio companies. Eagle Point works with investors, accelerators who bring their companies all the time to gain experience and help and have Eagle Point work for them, finding those opportunities and applying for them. We're happy to discuss that later with anyone who has something in mind. Next. So what does our program actually look like? It's called the STRATFI TACFI Growth Accelerator. It started in April, pretty much, just like the Air Force challenged the company. So as an organization that doesn't think we're challenged, we have a green light kind of plan. And once we get that green light and they announce the deadline and the opportunity, we open the program, we start talking to our companies, we start bringing things together. So it technically has already started for the companies, but the main focus is really kind of happening in May. There will be demo days and things like that. Right now is more of a preparation time for the companies and fine-tuning their business plan and knowing, what are the conversations that are going to be had with investors, and how do we walk away understanding, where I'm going to get traction up until June 3rd with a very challenging deadline. It's run in consecutively between Eagle Point and Deep Tech Showcase. As I said before, we have the network side and the event side, and we have Eagle Point Funding doing the grant writing and everything involved. I won't go through every small detail, but for any company or founder who's also here, so there's a 3-month program for eligible companies. It started on April 4th, and it's until the submission date on June 30th. There's assistance with government and private investor buy-in, assistance with submission paperwork, pitch events to give the companies exposure to stakeholders, and vice versa. One-on-one mentoring to help with companies. Sometimes it's our own mentoring. Sometimes we work with ex-government and active government advisors and contractors who come and coach the companies and give their own expertise in that space. And the last thing, as I said, it's a non-dilutive program. We take upfront fees and service fees from the companies who join. Only success fee is taken from Eagle Point Funding, and that's only on the government side. And yeah, keep on. So there's cohort sessions about getting ready for investors, Air Force stakeholder outreach. How do I go out and get myself an MOU, get myself a person who's going to allocate some of his budget into my company for STRATFI purposes, as an example. And getting ready for the submission, what data do I need to accumulate? How do I tell my story in a way that people want to fund it? Then we have a showcase where we also help them refine their pitch, dry runs to investors, showcase to investors, one industry showcase. We run events every month regardless of this program. So what we do is basically have those companies come to our event also. It's another engagement opportunity. It's another opportunity for them to pitch and to get out there. Submission building, and as I said, one-on-one sessions. To continue. The event is happening on May 12th. We have many events that are non-related to this, but just this specific event, a pitch event for investors and U.S. Air Force members to listen to eligible companies for the STRATFI TACFI program. So this is kind of the the edge of what we're doing. Is on May 12th is going to be an event, which is very unique in the event space. Even though in the deep tech world there's like all these amazing programs and things that happen even through the government as well. But there are a lot of events out there that really bring the industry partners from the venture capital side and the Air Force side. And that's a pretty unique thing. Just we very much appreciate that we're in that place to kind of bring these people together and listen to the companies, and then afterwards have follow-up meetings and stuff like that, and review their materials, etc. How can I get involved? What are the next steps? So first of all, for anyone who doesn't know, I'm Yuval Furman. I'm the director of events for Deep Tech Showcase. Events such like these, as I said, we have an industry event every month for both the government, venture capital, and industry side in our network to come and listen to our companies and not only learn and share, but also to the main goal is to form business relationships and to accomplish things and to help develop things forward. So this is our strategy, our founder, and we're here until 6 today in general, just to talk to people. If anyone wants to stick around, the first thing is letting us know you're interested. We don't fight. So as I said, we have many different programs where the sole purpose is deal flow for investors and business development for startups. So in general, if anything I said today is interesting, there's many programs that we did not talk about today and many different opportunities that we're happy to discuss, depending on what you guys are looking for. And our goal in the end is really to kind of facilitate this ecosystem to form as much success as possible. So just let us know. We'll connect you to Josh Barone, our director manager. He's the one leading the cohort, leading the review process for the companies, bringing in investors and stuff like that. Ask to review the companies as we can, we're still working on the companies pitch decks, as I said, because they're just getting, ready. So some things aren't available, but what are the companies, who they are, their websites, and things like that. We're happy to share that. So far, there's around 4 companies in this cohort. We're expecting that by the end we'll be at least at 6, which is large. It sounds small, just because there aren't that many companies really that are eligible for this opportunity specifically. Join the showcase event on May 12th. As I said, as a panelist, listen to the company's pitch, gain an idea of what they're doing and what they're applicable, and ask the hard questions you might want to ask them, so that they'll have to answer, and actually, you'll be able to understand if they're relevant. Join the ecosystem in general if deep tech is your thing. So deep tech, any dual use technologies are really the dual use technologies of the companies that we work with. If those are companies that you're interested in connecting to as investors, or if the customers and investors in that space are what you're interested in, then please talk to us and stay tuned, because we have all these amazing things happening all the time. And I think that's the last slide. There's an email here, but we can talk about connecting, stuff like that. I want to have time for questions. I'm actually surprised that I'm not running late, so that's always a good thing. So we'll open up for questions. Everyone virtual, I hope you can hear me. If you have a question, maybe either raise your hand or something like that. But we'll start, I think, with the people in the room. Any questions? Yeah.
So let's just say that there's an original idea.
Yeah.
Of IP protection. How do you secure a non-compete or a patent that it won't compete once you're submitting this idea
To the government?
however it is?
Yeah.
Let's just say my original idea is bottle of water, I've never seen before.
Yeah.
How do I protect my IP and create a non-compete for my originality and my patent?
So same as anywhere in the business world, and that's very, very standard, very standard. Not only with us, but also with the investors. We don't, something about us is, we're helping, as Ariel likes to say, we're helping companies, in this case, touch the money, right? Is gain access to the right people, open doors to the right places in divisions and departments and big organizations, find the right stakeholders looking for what they're doing. So there's many different things that we're doing to help companies go through that process. But what we don't do is we don't, at least at this point, and maybe we'll get there one day, we don't go through and continue with that deal with our companies and sit down in the meetings with the investor and the companies. It's something we're getting more involved in. But so on our side also, we usually have NDAs with companies we work with too, because we're even though we're not really touching the IP, and investors at the early stage won't, it's very, very standard that the companies that work with us, usually we highly recommend they sign NDAs with anyone, even if we're introducing them, so that their IP stays secure. Anything else? Yeah.
For once the companies move to the basically program, what's sort of the timeline on that? So say if you were trying to sort of make the introduction for a round that was already in progress, there was already demand from the client side, how quickly are you able to get that process?
Ariel, do you
We have one company. So usually we work faster than time. And we work and by the way, the one question we submitted so far is saying 20,000 patients. We never had that issue.
Yeah. No, it's just also because it's very much, yeah, absolutely. And it's also just very much standardized. A lot of these things can feel very foreign, but the government's a huge agency and the Air Force is a huge, and you said you were ex-military, so it's you understand that also. And very similar to big organizations, the person at the end, is a person in the end. And sometimes we'll be on Zoom with a contractor, and he's on a base somewhere and he's wearing his uniform, but it's like any other business meeting, right? He's making an investment and he has a budget for it. He has his own review process. So yes, just regarding that question regarding timing, an important question, right, is okay, a company gets selected, but how long do they, or they submit, how long do they know after June 30th if they've actually won? So again, working with government agencies, typically it's, they say around 60 days, and this is true for any government agency, is that sometimes, after 60 days, they say, we'll let you know, like we'll update you. We're not talking about years, we're not talking about anything like that, but it is just something to know is that, we can't, it's not that we can guarantee a date 100% that the government's going to move on it, but that the government is, it's their every interest to move forward and to continue. And there's a whole department in AFWorks that's in charge of this. On AFWorks' website, I highly recommend reading through their materials. They did their own webinar. We do webinars all the time for our ecosystem on this opportunity. They did their own one, which is way more nitty gritty, but it's if you're looking for exact details and stuff, so they can definitely talk about it more. I just chose the few things that I think are relevant for anyone involved in it. But yeah, that's it. The time question is a good question. Those are typically that's typically the timeline that we see.
Yeah, just on timing.
Yeah.
Listen to what you said, and also the charts you listed from.
Yeah.
2020, so you already got some cycles you want to shoot.
Yeah.
So what's the typical time span for phase 1, phase 2, and you are in phase 2, reaching phase 2 and phase 3. So what typical time span from the company already went to phase 3?
From the time that they started submitting to the Air Force, like from the phase 1 until commercialization, what that overall, is that the question?
Yeah,
or just for
the typical period of phase 1.
Okay, so
it's not 1 day or 1 week, but it's 1 to 3 years or something.
So the second option would be more of an accurate assumption. Ariel maybe can add more. However, something important to understand is that companies that are relevant for this, I didn't include this slide because it's more relevant for companies who are interested and less for investors. However, it's a good thing just to know. There's different criteria other than being AFWorks phase 2 awarded to join this program. And one of those is you have to have gotten that AFWorks phase 2 in the last 3 years. What's that? Oh, yeah, exactly. So not only in the last 3 years, but not also in the last 70 days, right? It has to be a program it has to be a phase 2 that you've been awarded and enough time's gone by that you've actually started executing that program. Not, if I win a phase 2 yesterday, I can't apply for STRATFI tomorrow. You have to be inside that program already that you're already working on, or else you have to wait for next year. So that sometimes is a problem for companies, but really what it does is it means that a company could have won 3 years ago and applied to STRATFI, and then it could have won phase 2 has the same requirements. So phase 2 also has to be a certain time after the phase 1. So sometimes companies will be going through AFWorks for 5 years, and some will be a year and a half, a year, and they'll be at phase 2. It depends, really depends on the company. But it's a long process.
Some company already reached to phase 3.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, because they only started in 2020.
Yeah. So no, they apply, that's from the STRATFI TACFI program in 2020 is the one that they were part of, meaning that they had to already have won a phase 2 and a phase 1.
Yeah.
So it's a longer process.
But some company probably not skip the phase 1 and directly.
Also an option.
Within the last 2 years.
Exactly.
Reached the
and AFWorks just overall, the AFWorks cycles are 3 or 4 times a year. Every year it's different.
We can promise you that they are here to stay.
Yeah.
We just hire some people after many years, many pilot programs. So we don't know the rules, but they are here to stay. And the basic rule is one. You need to have someone on the Air Force that is willing to do a pilot contract together with you. Everything else on top of that can change the rules. But this is the core rule for that program. Because as you know, in the past, we used to work only with integrators, like Boeing, Lockheed Martin, and stuff. And now they want to work directly with these startups. However,
whatever, they don't know how to do it. So the rule is simple. If there is someone from the airport who's willing to take the company to the Air Force, then it's fine.
Do you have a
Yeah,
internal partner who knows the know-how?
we have a few ex Air Force CEOs, and we have someone, we have a team, in-house team that talk to these people again and again. Because the main problem here is that once there is someone that is a decision maker and can make the decision, most likely he's about to leave his position because he's in a very high position. So you have a time stop of, let's say, 1 year. And so let's say you got funded by, and he was your contact person. Most likely that once you get to be eligible for that person left his position. And our job here is to find someone that will replace him. So it's about finding the investor, finding someone that will replace the stakeholder, and do the actual writing under a very tight deadline. Okay?
Just follow up on one more point.
Yes.
The commercial world is every day, right? Every day, every year. And the government programs and from submitting deadline review, is on a rolling basis, or they have some kind of season? Spring, fall,
Yeah.
budgets.
It is. It's cyclical. It's cyclical.
Yeah.
Technically, they do it every quarter. There's like a funding. There's a funding update. By the way, this is AFWERX, right? There's the whole DoD with hundreds of opportunities. Eagle Point, all they do is search for opportunities, find the applications and the wording. Where can I find the right application for a company to be successful? You know, in the planning. But last year, Q3, AFWERX opened. We kind of understand the office politics behind it, just because we're very much involved. But you know, it's anyone's guess really. AFWERX opened up a new funding mechanism called SpaceWorks. And if you went to SpaceWorks on their LinkedIn, you'd see that they have 2 employees who technically also still work for AFWERX. So exactly when that happened, all of a sudden AFWERX announced, we're skipping this quarter. No funding this quarter, and next quarter we're doing direct to phase 2, no phase 1. So this is our kind of educated assumption. They opened up a new division like any company. They don't have the bandwidth. There's a lot of things going on. They dedicated bandwidth to that program for space technologies. So they skipped a quarter because they had to make a decision. And then the next cycle, they gave out a direct to phase 2 opportunity for companies who couldn't apply to phase 1.
But again, you should keep in mind that the DoD is huge.
Yeah.
Every given moment, every agency offers solicitation. And when the Air Force is looking for AI, most likely the Navy, the Army, the NASA, and ISS, and many other agencies will be actively looking for the same solutions because they have the same needs for telecom, cyber, advanced materials.
Yeah.
So we tend to submit 1 application per month per company. So if you are a client, so this is, in my opinion, the best opportunity that you can get, but still there are many others, and we'll make sure that we not, skip or, go only for.
Yeah.
When you have a researcher, PhD, we tend to go to the same pockets of money again and again. Our mission is to delegate around together with him and find new pockets of money for him. So definitely effort is challenging, but there are so many other opportunities, and most of them are not under the SDIR. Okay, the SDIR is 3 times a year, but you have the DAAs, all agency announcements, and there are huge opportunities. We lately won a contract of 3.4 million.
Through NASA,
For NASA, for a satellite company. So in order to get them to that point, we put them in contact with the program managers, and they got funded before with in-kind money from the ISS 2 projects. So it's a process.
You emphasize on more focusing on the U.S. Air Force, right? But you also mentioned that watch out duties and the Space Force.
Yeah.
Well, there are different duties, very broad.
Huge.
The Marine Army and all kinds of. Air Force is one of the 5 or 6 of the branches.
Yes.
Now you have Space Force, which is additional to the Air Force. Yeah. So, so my question is that you still emphasize on Air Force, or you open-eyed?
We follow the non.
100% open. Eagle Point has no specific focus on Air Force. This specific program, being a joint program, that's an opportunity for us to work together with Eagle Point, Deep Tech Showcase and Eagle Point, because of what we do, is 100% focused on Air Force because that's where the program is. If tomorrow NASA opens up this opportunity, Ariel's smiling because we'll be back in New York next week. We'll talk about it probably if that happens. But if a program opens tomorrow in NASA, that's where we're going. And same goes with our focus industry-wise as a company, because if the government this year or last cycle of budgeting decided to spend I don't know how many percentages more on semiconductors as an example, that's where we're focusing on because that's where the opportunity is. So it really depends. And as Ariel said, just like regarding our clients, companies usually come with an idea of where I'm developing a propulsion system, or I'm developing AI for training fighter pilots, but where else can that be used? The Navy has pilots, the Army has pilots. I think the Army has more planes than officially than the actual Air Force. Someone threw that as a tidbit at one of our events. So companies sometimes are focused on where they want their technology to be, but we want to win more opportunities. So let's focus on the wording of this proposal through the Department of Energy for data projects or things like that. There's moving pieces. It's fun. It's a challenge as a company for us also where we focus on. That's a big part of it.
Technology like network technologies are applicable
Yeah.
innovations to all the branches.
Exactly. So it's important to this specific opportunity. However, right now is in the Air Force. Space Force, if it wasn't clear, is part of this. Space Force I think on one of the slides, the funds that were allocated last year were 390 million, something on that scale, and I think 45 million was from Space Force with STRATFI, TACFI opportunity. So they have their own, kind of way of doing it. So I know officially our time already went past. I don't know if you had a meeting, I don't want you guys to feel bad about continuing with your day. We're here till 6 today here, but we're here. Ariel's here until the weekend. I'm in New York till next week. We have meetings. Maybe with Ben again also. But in any case, we're happy to meet to discuss, happy to connect you to the team that's leading this project so they can share you the info on the events and on the companies that are facilitating and that are participating and things like that. Or we're happy to chat over coffee or drink any other opportunity that we have. What else? True. Yeah. Yeah.
Very good. Thank you.
Of course. Thank you for coming. Really great. Thank you.
Yeah, I would like to talk about
Amazing. You have time? You drove all the way here. Go get a couple cocktails on you. Relax. Relax. We're here. Thank you for coming. Yeah. And say hi.
Multiple branches.
So
the 4 companies that you have, they do use their.
all of them, and there's no like non-compete.
But what the risk is the government will seek to over that.
No, so there's basically companies from the start, there's companies that will only work with the government, some that not. Companies, yes, because they've already gone from phase 1 and phase 2, it's very, it's a matter of national security. So there's a high part, anything has to be missile, stuff like that. So from the start, we can't even work with them.
So they're already sold.
We can't even work with them. We can't work with
I
them.
look forward to seeing them.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, me too.
Thank you.
And I'll send you. Yeah. Okay. It's gonna be virtual. We have that every month. That month, it's gonna be one with different So our events typically in virtual. Next year in Seattle, coming into that satellite event, it's going to be a lot of
So like when you were mentioning the conferences, talking about marketing or conference is just for the actual company when it comes time to market the actual company that.
Yeah, no, there's a lot. We didn't really talk about like the rest of the stuff. This is just one good opportunity. Like other complicated opportunities. Trying to keep them.
The more complicated, the better.
Oh, maybe. Yeah. Usually it's either you're in and not at all. So it's like top tech, deep tech. Yeah, I don't say answers.
Yeah, I think we answered a lot of times. Got some to share, but I was curious for one last question. When you're finding with this sort of Air Force specific program, technologies are.
I'm very excited for this opportunity.
Vice versa, like from both.
Yeah.
It's like a very general. Government traction,
Also Florida.
traction,
So I have that here
traction,
for.
somehow also has government traction. The more companies already involved with. So at the end of the day,
Yeah.
so it's a very, it's not like you have to meet X, Y, and Q, and then you select from that select. So it's very much how sometimes there's connections. Like we have Air Force people connect us to people and Army people. So there's like all the different like things that happen. It's like kind of like the last black box. We don't know exactly what happens. But it's very hard to ignore.
Yep, I had
Like lots of companies have passed through phase 2, phase contract. There's very getting them reviewed. Very going out, reaching out, hearing them. Getting people, they say I want to talk. So our program. It's just to keep them out. So a big part of that is also just go ahead and do it. Once you do that, you're better at it. Right. You go out and you continue talking. So.
Yeah, so so she's very interested in sort of we call it program. So yeah, so she goes to one singer and then I think the last guy.
Okay.
I didn't know that she was doing it, but
She already
but yeah, so I mean, hopefully, we can sort of.
Yes.
Yes, good. So thank you.
Only after I always want to
Very
do
interesting
it,
product.
because I got the first
So I have two
chance.
companies raising funding right now.
Well, they're like
Data analysis software, already working with the Army and Navy. So mine's already there. So just need more funding and commercialize it. So no competition. So this is a wonderful 5-year program. Early stage fundraising, which is spin off of existing large airline business, the airline cargo. That's true, like wide body inflation, so it's more. So we're raising $40 million. So that's been nice synergies there as well. And I'm also on the board of a company called Porky, they benchmark with the tech, which gets from this program. You and I can have a conversation about fits your ecosystem. So we're just about to start getting investors for late seed round. Yeah, so global basis.
No, absolutely. VR education, trainers, everything like that.
I don't think that HR would be there. Because it has to find the-
Like it's already like, well, it depends on the company, but for educational
This is
technology.
sort of like this program, but then some other cool stuff. Or something.
The general.
So I'm gonna run a meeting at
No, no
half an
problem.
hour.
Thank you so much for making the time.
Thank you. That's it.
I'll be able to read it next fall.
Okay.
So yes, in one sense, it's a completely concept it's we have the for me, I just so I'm giving you my ship